In the summer of 1683, the destiny of an entire continent rested on a single, surrounded city. From the east came the Ottoman Empire in overwhelming force, nearly 300,000 soldiers, a moving mountain of banners, iron, and gunpowder, rolling westward with the certainty of a force of nature. From the west, only 15,000 defenders, soldiers, clergymen, and ordinary citizens clung to crumbling stone walls with little more than their resolve and their prayers to sustain them. For 60 days, the city smoldered beneath the crescent moon. For 60 nights, its people did not fight for conquest or glory, but for the simple right to survive another morning. It was a collision of worlds, of faith against empire, of old ambition meeting raw defiance, of an age ending and another struggling to be born. When the smoke of battle finally thinned, one truth rang out loud enough to outlast every throne and every army, that the courage of the few, not the numbers of the many, is what bends the arc of civilizations. This is the story of the Second Siege of Vienna, the battle that pulled Europe back from the very edge of conquest. To understand those 60 days, one must first understand what drove the empire westward. For generations, the Ottoman Sultanate had never truly released its grip on one great unfulfilled ambition. Vienna was not merely a city. It was a symbolic lock on the door to everything beyond the Alps, to the rivers, plains, and kingdoms of the continent's heart. In 1529, Suleiman the Magnificent had led his armies to its walls and been turned away by autumn mud, stretched supply lines, and fierce resistance. The siege collapsed, leaving behind thousands of graves and a dream suspended in unfinished time. That wound never healed. For the Ottomans, Vienna was always unfinished business, a page left blank and waiting for the hand that would finally complete it. By the closing decades of the 17th century, the Ottoman Empire still commanded enormous power, yet its edges had begun to show the first signs of strain. Its campaigns had grown longer, its administrative machinery heavier, its victories more costly to sustain. Inside Europe, meanwhile, the Christian kingdoms remained locked in their own rivalries, too consumed by mutual suspicion to present any united front to the world beyond their borders. France and the Habsburgs jostled endlessly for continental dominance. Catholic and Protestant rulers regarded each other across a chasm of theological hostility that centuries of conflict had only deepened. It was, in short, a continent fractured at precisely the moment when unity mattered most. In Istanbul, Sultan Mehmed IV had grown restless for the kind of achievement that would cement his name in history. But it was his Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, who took that restlessness and hammered it into a war plan. Kara Mustafa was a man of iron discipline, volcanic pride, and total certainty in his own historical importance. He believed, without apparent doubt, that destiny had chosen him to complete what Suleiman had only sketched in outline. He laid out his vision before the Sultan without hesitation or qualification. "Give me Vienna," he said, "and I will throw open every road through Europe." The Sultan gave his blessing. In the spring of 1683, the empire mobilized its full strength and turned its face west. Janissaries in white turbans marched in tight columns alongside Sipahi cavalry. Tatar riders swept in from the northern steppes beneath rippling green banners. Engineers and master gunners followed with wagon trains heavy with cannon and powder. Nearly 300,000 men moved as one, not merely an army on campaign, but a civilization transplanted into a weapon, carrying with it the full weight of imperial faith, wounded pride, and a century of deferred ambition. Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I, watching the storm approach from his palace window, made a quick and deeply undignified decision. He fled the capital westward to Linz, taking his court and his courtiers with him, and leaving behind a garrison of 15,000 exhausted men, and one commander, charged with the task of holding a city against an empire. That commander was Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, and he was precisely the kind of man such a moment required. He did not pause to count the odds before deciding to fight. He looked at crumbling walls and a frightened population, and saw not impossibility, but the raw materials of resistance. He sealed every gate. He issued a call to every resident regardless of age, trade, or station. Men hauled timber and sandbags to the ramparts, while old soldiers taught them where to aim. Women organized supply chains to keep the cannon crews fed and the injured attended to. Children carried messages and powder between fortifications as quickly as their legs could manage. The hammer and the church bell became the city's twin rhythms as Vienna remade itself, street by street and district by district, into something that could withstand what was coming. On July 14, 1683, the eastern horizon turned dark with movement. The Ottoman host spread across the surrounding plains, in a display of force so vast, it seemed to alter the landscape permanently. A second city of white canvas appeared where fields had stood that morning. Drums rolled in deep, slow thunder that moved through the earth and into the bones of every man on the walls. At the center of the vast encampment rose a great pavilion of green silk, the field headquarters of Kara Mustafa Pasha, appointed with carpets and the complete confidence of a man who considers victory a formality. That first night, Vienna's people stood on their ramparts and watched 10,000 campfires bloom across the dark. Some prayed, some wept, some could only stare. When dawn broke, the first Ottoman cannon fired. The ground trembled. A tower cracked. The second siege had officially, irrevocably begun. Far to the north, King John III Sobieski of Poland had been tracking the situation at Vienna with the trained eye of a man who had spent his career studying how empires move and where they are most exposed. A veteran of engagements against Tatars, Cossacks, and Ottomans alike, he understood without needing to be told what the city's fall would mean. Not just for Austria, but for every kingdom between Warsaw and the Western Sea. He assembled his nobles and addressed them with the directness of a general who has no time for diplomatic softening. Vienna is the wall behind which we all shelter. When it falls on top of us. Within weeks, 20,000 Polish soldiers were moving south through forest and mountain pass, joining German and Austrian contingents as they went. It was the first true military coalition Europe had assembled in a generation, born not from shared interest or treaty obligation, but from the most basic instinct available to nations, the will to survive together. By September 12, 1683, the Allied army occupied the Kahlenberg Ridge above Vienna. At dawn, as morning mist dissolved from the tree line, Kara Mustafa looked up from his green pavilion and saw what he had failed to account for. Sobieski rode at the army's head in polished armor, eagle feathers on his helm, and Duke Charles of Lorraine commanded the left wing. The plan was direct. Descend from the high ground and fall upon the camp below before it could organize its defense, striking an enemy grown slow on the certainty of imminent victory. Austrian infantry crashed into the Ottoman flanks through the forest. German foot soldiers drove the enemy from entrenched positions across the ridge slopes. The Janissaries fought back with terrifying discipline, reforming and countercharging through smoke and chaos. For hours the result was genuinely uncertain. Inside the city, the defenders heard the gunfire shift to the north and rushed to the walls screaming to one another, firing their remaining cannon toward the Ottoman positions in desperate solidarity. For the first time in 2 months, they were not alone in this. By mid-afternoon, Kara Mustafa committed his cavalry reserve. Thousands of horsemen sent thundering across open ground to shatter the Allied center before the full coalition weight could descend. Then, from the ridge above, came the sound of Polish war horns cutting across the noise of battle. Sobieski had held his cavalry in reserve through the entire morning and afternoon, measuring the moment with the patience of a man who has spent a lifetime waiting for one exactly like this. Behind him stood 3,000 winged Hussars, Europe's most feared heavy cavalry, their wooden wing frames shrieking and roaring as the formation gathered speed down the slope. Behind them stretched 20,000 more horsemen, the largest mounted strike force assembled on the continent since the medieval era. Sobieski raised his saber, pointed it toward the Grand Vizier's green pavilion below, and spoke the single word that would echo across centuries of military history. Charge! The hillside became a river of iron and momentum. The formation descended in tight order, lances leveled, thousands of steel points flashing in the late sun, accelerating with every yard until the Ottoman line did not bend. It ceased to exist. In under half an hour, the greatest cavalry charge of the modern European age tore through the heart of the camp and drove straight toward the silk walls of Kara Mustafa's headquarters. Janissaries broke inward. Cavalry scattered in every direction. Tents caught fire. The plain turned to smoke, screaming horses, and abandoned weapons. By sunset, the Sultan's single greatest military force had ceased to function as an army. Kara Mustafa fled east. Days later, a royal courier reached his camp in Hungary carrying no letter, only a silken cord. The man who had once commanded 300,000 soldiers wrapped it around his neck and accepted his sultan's verdict in silence. He died alone in a tent in Belgrade, and with him died the empire's long ambition to plant its standard in the center of Europe. Vienna emerged from its 60 days as a city of ruins and survivors. Families searched the rubble. Priests walked the streets blessing the fallen on both sides. When the evening bells rang out on that first free night, they did not carry the desperate pitch of a city begging to be saved. They rang with something heavier and more durable, the sound of people who had endured past the point where endurance seemed possible. When Sobieski rode through the gates the following morning, the people fell to their knees in the street and called him what history would confirm, the savior of Europe. He dismounted, found Starhemberg, and said the words the Count most needed to hear. It was your endurance that kept this wall standing until we arrived. Across the continent, candles burned from Rome to Krakow. For the Ottoman Empire, the long retreat had begun. For Europe, Vienna marked the moment a civilization stopped fighting merely to survive and began at last to move forward.